Well, greetings from Cooley Law School. My name is Patrick Corbett. I'm a professor of criminal law here at Thomas M. Cooley Law School in Lansing, Michigan. In this video clip, I'd like to talk to you about how the criminal laws of Michigan might apply to how people use high-tech devices like a cell phone camera to take sexual images of other people and then people who are under the age of 18 and then send it to others. This information is important because it'll help you recognize if you're committing a crime by merely possessing these images on your cell phone, or if you've done something even more severe, if you've taken that image and then sent it off to somebody else, or if you in fact have a hand in producing these images. It's important for you to recognize how the law is applied to what you may have already confronted in your school. I want to do this through the usage of a hypothetical that I think a lot of you will be able to relate to because it's happened in a lot of schools in Michigan and around the country. So here's the hypothetical, and I'm going to read it to you. Jim, 18, asks his girlfriend Carol, 15, to take a sexual picture of herself without clothes and to send it to him through her cell phone. Carol reluctantly decides to take the photo and send it to Jim. Jim receives it and sends it to 5 of his friends who all keep Carol's image on their cell phones. Is this a crime? If so, what crime is it? First, before we even look at the law, I want you to think about this. Who is the worst person here? Who is the defendant and who is the victim? Is there a victim? Is one defendant worse than the other? Carol in particular, you probably wondered about her. Is she the defendant, or is she one of the defendants? Is she somebody who's committed a crime, or is she a victim of this crime? Let's think about that as we apply the law to the facts that are presented in this hypothetical. This slide before you now indicates what the law is here in Michigan, at least in part as it's applicable to this situation. And this is a very complex law, and I've narrowed it down to just a couple points. But I want to highlight a few things about this law to help you understand how it applies to this situation. So, first of all, knowingly producing child sexually abusive material is punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Now, the child sexually abusive material, what's that? Well, it's child pornography. That's the term that the law uses to describe child pornography. So then what's child pornography? Child pornography is an image of a child, and a child under Michigan law is defined as anybody under the age of 18, which includes basically anybody in high school except for a few kids who might turn 18 by their late in the springtime of their senior year. So just about every kid in Michigan is a child under this law. Child sexually abusive material, child pornography. What's the pornography? The law has a specific list of what they're looking for, but to make it simple, it really comes down to this. Is it some kind of a sexual pose, some kind of a sexual position? It doesn't have to be naked. It can be naked or it can be with clothes on as long as it's sexual in nature. So that's what we have for child sexually abusive material or child pornography. Now what about knowingly? What does that mean, to knowingly produce it? Well, that means you're not doing it by mistake or accident. You're not just accidentally pressing a button and recording something. You are doing this fully aware of what it is that you're doing. And what about producing it? Well, it's creating something from nothing. So you have to ask yourself, who knowingly produced child sexually abusive material? Carol did. Carol did. Carol, the person that many of you might be thinking is a victim here, and maybe she is, at least in part. She did it reluctantly, but nevertheless she did produce child sexually abusive material. Is anybody else responsible for knowingly producing child sexually abusive material? Michigan's law has a provision that essentially makes it so that you're punishable for producing child sexually abusive material if you've induced somebody else to do it. And who induced somebody else to do it here? Jim did. So both Jim and Carol are looking at a potential for a 20-year felony for knowingly producing child pornography. The next one, knowing distribution of child sexually abusive material. Well, we've already gone over the child sexually abusive material. We've already gone over knowing, so you know what those involve. Distribution basically means sending it out. Punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Who's responsible for that? Carol and Jim. So they're on the hook for 2 different potential felonies. The last one, knowing possession of child sexually abusive material. Possession means you could have it physically in your hand, you could have it in your pocket, you could have it on a storage device in your pocket, like your cell phone. It could be near you. It could be in your drawer where you happen to be, or your locker. Possession can be interpreted in very broad ways. And so the question is, who is possessing these images of the image of Carol? Well, we know Carol produced it, so she's got it already on her cell phone, so she's possessing it too. We know Jim's got it, so he's possessing it also. And all the remaining guys that he sent it to, the 5 friends, they're also possessing it. Now, as you might recall from the hypothetical, they decided to keep Carol's image on their cell phones. They didn't delete it. Would it be a crime if they received it and they immediately deleted it? Probably not. Probably no prosecutor would take it that way because it could be an accidental receipt. They may not have wanted it. They didn't ask for somebody to send it to them. But the fact that they kept it on their cell phones meant that they are now fully aware of what they've got and they're intending to possess it. Not by mistake, not by accident. So they'd all be on the hook for a 4-year felony for knowing possession of child pornography. Are there any other crimes that are worth noting? Well, from this slide you can see there are at least a couple other charges that we could talk about. Soliciting a minor for immoral purposes. What does that mean? Well, first of all, it's punishable by up to 4 years in prison. A minor. Who's a minor? Well, a minor under Michigan law is a person under the age of 16. Carol was how old? 15. So she's a minor for purposes of that statute. Immoral purposes. Would taking a sexual picture of yourself, do you think that would be defined as an immoral purpose? And the answer is yes, it would be under the law. Who solicited her to take a naked picture of herself, a sexual picture of herself? Jim did. The law, soliciting a minor for immoral purposes, doesn't require Carol to actually produce the image. He could be on the hook just for asking her to do it, which is important for us to recognize. Just because the image is not produced doesn't mean he's not on the hook for potentially violating this charge for soliciting a minor for immoral purposes. Finally, there is also a separate charge that's potentially available due to the fact that a computer was used to produce, obtain, and distribute the child sexually abusive material. So you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, it's not a computer, it's a cell phone. Well, if you look at the law under Michigan, computer is defined very broadly. It includes a cell phone. Cell phones today have the capacity to communicate and interact with others in meaningful ways. And because the computer definition under Michigan's law is interpreted and defined very broadly, it would include a cell phone. A cell phone would be a computer for purposes of the law. So, not only would they be potentially on the hook for the child pornography charges, but Jim would also be facing the soliciting a minor charge, and a prosecutor could also consider a separate felony for all of them because a computer was used to commit the crime itself. This is something that is happening in Michigan and in states across the country. You can see from the slide before you now, out of the Genesee County, Michigan area, the Flint area of eastern Michigan. Here's an article indicating that the Genesee County prosecutor David Layton is considering criminal charges against a teen who allegedly had an inappropriate photo on a cell phone. Prosecutors are looking at it, the schools are looking at it. It's this thing we call sexting, and it's something that could get you into a lot of trouble. I hope this video gives you some good ideas on how not to use your cell phone camera. Thanks for listening.